Emotionally, this was the worst point.
Yeah.
I felt like we had given up too soon. Like, I felt personally responsible for killing our baby. I started off this time.
Yeah. And this story today is crazy. It's actually part 1 of 2. And it's about everything that happened after our transfer.
Yeah, so the transfer was March 28th, and then obviously the dreaded 2-week wait, which is that period of time that you know you could be pregnant, but you have to wait until you go in for your beta blood draw.
Well, you have to wait, but actually everyone does home pregnancy tests. So, yeah, you were trying to hold off for as long as you could.
Yeah, I actually didn't plan on testing at all until the day before.
That's a joke. We all knew she was gonna. She comes home one day and she's like, I have pregnancy tests. And then did you already had tested at work or something?
No,
oh, okay,
no,
okay.
I wanted to. It was hard not to like leave work, go to the dollar store, pick up a pregnancy test, and just take it.
Yeah, luckily she included me in this, and so she came home, she said she had them, I'm like, hey, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Do the test. But anyway.
Yeah, the actual blood draw was 14 days past our transfer, and we transferred a 6-day-old embryo. I said I wasn't going to test until the night before, and I think I made it 5 days before I caved.
Not the full length of time at all. That's all right.
Yeah.
The first test
was negative. It was a stark negative, but we knew it was still early.
Yeah.
So that wasn't so upsetting. And then I struggled to wait, I think 2 more days, and then we tested again on day 7.
I know. I really wanted her to just like wait from then on, because no matter what happened, like if the test wasn't amazing, if it didn't come back pregnant, it was just gonna really, really bum us out.
Yeah.
But we kept testing.
Yeah, so day 7, we got what they call a squinter, which is, you know, if you held it up to the light at just the right angle and you look, pregnant.
It was so faint, but it was something.
Yeah, but it was there, and, you know, they say that if there's a line, there's a line. It's very unusual to get a false positive, unless you do something like let it dry, and then you can get, like a fake line or things like that, but if you look at it in the window you're supposed to, it's pretty accurate. So
yeah, so we were really excited. There was that little faint line. We were like, okay, well now we're testing like every day.
I was testing every morning. I'd get up and they say your first morning urine is the one you're supposed to use because it's the most concentrated.
Nice.
So
yeah, so we were doing that to keep it all the same every morning.
It did pretty quick start to get darker.
Not like a lot.
Yeah, but we could tell it went from being a squinter to like you could look at it and say, there's a line. So that was so exciting. Literally, I was 29 at the time. First time I'd ever been pregnant. It was, we were just...
We thought we were pregnant.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was getting darker. It was a little bit later than normal. Do you remember what the day was that we first saw the line? And we were... I
think it was 8 days the next day after. Okay. You could tell that there was a line there, even though it was still faint. And then it got a little darker the next day, but then it just kind of stopped getting darker. And, you know...
Maybe even got a little lighter one of those days. We were trying to decide if it was actually the same as before or if it was a little lighter, which was really weird.
Yeah. So, yeah, I kept testing every morning, and I was just really worried that it wasn't getting darker. But, you know, I am a part of a couple of support groups on Facebook, which... For any of you going through infertility, I highly recommend it. My husband's actually a part of the same group, and it's just such a great place to ask things. So I said, you know, I took a picture, and I said, here are the pictures of my pregnancy tests. Is this normal? And, you know, some people are like, well, I'd still be cautiously optimistic. But then other people are like, oh, mine never got darker. I just think certain people dropped less HCG than other people, and some people outright being like, I think you're out of luck. I think it's a chemical pregnancy, which is what they call it if it implants, but then it's a very, very early miscarriage. And those are actually a lot more common than people realize. It's just a lot of women having a chemical pregnancy have no idea that they were ever pregnant because it happens so early.
We knew basically we had to wait for the blood draw. We were still not confident.
It didn't keep me from testing. But...
Right, it didn't keep her from testing, and we weren't confident going into the blood draw because those lines were so faint, and we're seeing all these stories on the group of really dark lines, much different than we were experiencing. So we were definitely unsure.
Finally, the day arrived. I went in, I think we both went in for that one and got the blood draw done, and it was super quick, but then you have to wait all day and sometimes until the next business day. I went straight into work, and it was just torture.
Yeah, that was worse than the 2-week wait.
Yeah,
waiting for that phone call.
This whole process, being at work and knowing that I could be pregnant and waiting for these results, it really was so difficult to.
It was draining.
It was hard to pretend like everything was normal and not just obsess the entire time.
We were obsessing a little bit.
We were, yeah. Actually, I got the results because I was checking my portal religiously all day, and they uploaded the results before they called me with them.
Yeah.
So I saw the results, and it was actually kind of nice. I had a little time to prepare for the call because my HCG was only a 20.
Yeah, and which is really, really low.
It's low. For those of you who have been through it, you know, but for those of you who don't or are a little less familiar, if it's under a 5, they just say it's negative, there's no way this is going to result in a pregnancy. But a lot of times when they draw your beta, it's like day 8 to day 10. My clinic waits a full 2 weeks. Which a lot of them don't. So the fact that it was only a 20, they said they really were looking for it to be above 100. But 20 is positive, and there can be cases of what they call late implanters.
We found a couple on the support group of people who are like, I had that, I had a 20, I think a 24 was one of them.
Yeah, well, one of them had a 7 for her first one, and she has twins now.
Yeah, so it is possible to start really low, and some of that just comes with a late implant or an early test.
Yeah.
It can happen to be that low, but in our case, it was a late test and a low number, and so
the lines weren't getting darker, showing that it wasn't progressing. So we were definitely very cautiously optimistic at that point.
Yeah, we were hopeful, but it wasn't a good number.
Yeah, so they did want me to come in for another blood draw. And so I went in 2 days later. You typically wait 2 to 3 days between every blood draw because that gives it time to see if it's rising. It should be doubling to tripling.
Yeah, no matter what your number starts at. It should double or triple every 2 days.
If it rises at least 60%, it can still be positive and turn out fine. It's less normal if it's that low of a rise, but it could still happen. But they're really looking for it to double or triple every 2 to 3 days. So so I went back in. I think I started going at this point by myself because we only have one card. Dan works from home.
Pretty soon anyway. We might have done the second one together.
And then, went straight to work and waited. And this time they did call me before they uploaded it to the portal. Maybe they were on to me. And it was only a 24 2 days later. So it had only risen very slightly.
Yeah.
But they said, it did still rise, and it is still possible, so we do want to do one more beta. So April 11th was when it was 24. That was my second beta. And then on the 15th, I went in for my third beta, and it was a 101. So it had tripled since the last time I was in.
Right.
And so we were just ecstatic. We just thought, it was just a latent planter. This is it.
And if it was 20 to 24, whatever, the testing can be kind of weird. So you kind of average them out. So they're like, well, from 20 to 100 was like 60% basically over those 4, 5, 6 days. So for us, that was like, hey, that's within the normal range. Like we could go with this. It could be real.
Yeah. So it was so exciting. We really thought that was it, that we were pregnant, and that we'd see it continue to rise like it should from there. But of course, they wanted to check again to make sure it was still rising.
So this is your fourth.
So on the 17th, I went in, and I was 20 days past my transfer at this time, and I had a 139. So once again, it had gone from 101 to 139.
It kind of did the same thing it did the first time. It just barely.
It was just barely risen. So so that was the point that they said, this probably isn't viable. We would recommend that you stop all of your medications, stop the estrogen suppositories, stop the progesterone injections, and let it pass naturally.
And they were looking at the total time that we'd spent waiting for these results and the number that we had at the end of that, which was 139.
Yeah.
And so they were just like, this isn't high enough. By now it should be way, way higher, like in the multiple thousands.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so
it was hard to hear.
Yeah, so that's what they said, but they also said, we totally understand if you want to keep doing those medications until you reach 6 weeks, at which point you can come back in for an ultrasound and we can just check. And, at 6 weeks, we should definitely be able to see at least a sac, maybe a fetal pole. So if that's what you need to do. And I kind of didn't want to do that. It was, April 22nd was my 30th birthday, and I just kind of wanted to be done by then.
It'd been pretty stressful for like 2 weeks, waiting and waiting and waiting and hearing like maybe and then no,
weeks.
maybe and then no, and everything was just really depressing.
Yeah, it was. So, so my first inclination was, no, let's just stop meds. But, my mom was in town, and I talked to her and I talked to Dan, and they both said, I understand that this is really difficult, but I think that you'll regret it if you don't just see. So I did decide to wait. They wanted to do it on the 22nd, and I said, you know what? Nope, not going in on my birthday. I just relaxed and had a really great time and just tried to enjoy that celebration as much as I could, despite everything weighing over me. So we did go into the clinic on April 23rd, and they did an ultrasound, and they saw nothing at all.
So no gestational sac, no fetal pole, nothing.
Yeah. They couldn't detect any kind of implantation whatsoever. And so at that was the point where they said, I'm really sorry. You're having a chemical pregnancy, an early miscarriage, and we're going to have you stop all of your meds. So that was really sad.
Yeah. I mean, after all that, for them to find nothing, like we thought at least they'll find the sac and say, well, it tried, but something went wrong and it couldn't really grow.
Yeah.
Or they'd find some indication that it had implanted and there was nothing there.
Yeah. So they did have their nurse practitioner come in and talk to us and just explain that they didn't see anything, that I should stop meds, and then she said, as soon as you stop all your meds, that beta is going to drop really fast. At that time, I was just really glad to have some closure.
Yeah.
At the time, I felt like this was dragging on for a really long time. I just wanted an answer so that, I could grieve and have closure on it.
We thought we were done.
Yep.
We thought we were out, but we weren't.
Yeah, unfortunately, the story keeps going.
It got crazy. Okay, so what happened next?
So the next thing that happened, she had told me, well, your HCG is just going to bottom out immediately. It's just going to drop so fast.
Great,
yeah.
We can take a pregnancy test at home and we'll just see that line disappear and we'll know.
Yeah. No. I took a pregnancy test on Friday morning.
So 3 days later.
And the line was so much darker.
It was like about halfway to the full pregnancy line, whereas before it'd been a fairly faint line the whole time, consistent but faint. So it had gotten, we thought, twice as dark, 3 times as dark.
Yeah, it was so dark, and I was shocked. And so I get on the portal, I email them, and I said, okay, I think my HCG is still going up. Something's wrong here. And this is where this story gets really frustrating as far as a lot of the healthcare professionals who just don't believe you when you say things, like they don't trust you to know what's going on in your own body.
Some of the things they said were, well, it can vary if you test at different times of the day, morning or night. We're like, we know, we always test in the morning. Like, there's things we
and they
know.
say, well, it can keep going up before it starts dropping.
Like, okay.
But even if it had gone up a bit, these lines are markedly darker.
Yeah.
So
it seemed like a huge difference.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, the tests aren't accurate, so it could be different test to test. And we're like, all the other tests were completely spot on.
Yeah. So they won't they won't let me come in and do a blood draw or an ultrasound. They say, you're fine, it's okay.
Of all the times you're asking for a blood draw, they don't let you go in.
And of course this is a Friday, and so now it's the weekend, and I decided to just go with it. But Monday morning, I'm like, all right, now, if it's supposed to drop so fast, now it has to be darker,
Another 3
right?
days later.
Literally, the pregnancy line was as dark as the control line.
If we'd have gotten this result, we would have been like, we are pregnant. If it had happened earlier, we would have been like, there's no doubt about it, pregnant. So we're saying, what the heck's going on?
So I'm like, okay, something is wrong. This is unacceptable. So I'm going to reference this again. So that day, I go in and they just do another blood draw. They still don't do an ultrasound, but they say, they're humoring me. They say, okay, we'll draw your blood. You're a little overbearing. You're one of those
They didn't
patients,
think they were going to find anything. They thought it was going to be lower or whatever.
Yeah. So this is April 29th. I go in for a beta, and it was 2,180.
Just completely ridiculous.
So, literally 139.
So, you might think at this point
last
we'd
one.
be really excited, but actually we were like terrified because she had stopped all her medications over the weekend. Everything that baby needed to survive had been stopped 3 days earlier.
Yeah.
So we were freaking out.
Well, I can say with absolute surety that emotionally, this was the worst point.
Yeah.
I felt like we had given up too soon.
Yeah, like if we'd have just hung on.
Yeah, like I felt personally responsible for killing our baby.
Yeah, which was not true.
So it was really difficult, and I drove home and I called my mom and I just sobbed the whole drive home. And I got home and I just sat in our carport and sobbed until Dan came out.
I was like, I know she's home by now, and I went out and I just kind of saw her like talking to her mom and crying, and I was just like, I'm just gonna sit out here on the patio and just wait. But it was awful. It was awful. I mean, everything had been fairly bad up until then, not knowing, but at this point we thought we'd done something horrible.
Yeah. So I go inside. And my doctor's office is closed by now because, again, they didn't call me with these results. I just saw them in my portal. And, but you can call the hospital and have them page the doctor on call. So I paged them, and a different doctor than my normal reproductive endocrinologist calls. And he is just very condescending, and he keeps saying, oh, well, you know, that HCG can keep going up before it drops. And we're like,
hello? It went up to 20-something, like 2,000-something.
2180.
2180.
Yeah.
And it was, like, we were trying to get him to understand, because he wasn't familiar with us. He had no concept. But we were like, it went from, like, 139 to 2180. And he still just was like, it can go up and down.
Yeah, he's like,
oh my gosh.
And so we're like, we're going to restart the medicine. And he's like, no, don't do that. And we were like, I just had to. I had to restart it because
everything we'd learned about this was that, like, we'd seen other stories of women who had stopped, and then it found out that they were pregnant still, and so they restarted the progesterone injections, and like it worked out, or like they had the chance of it working out. So I was really specific with the doctor. I was like, will this hurt her if she does an injection? He's like, well, no. And we're like, okay, well then we're doing one. Because that was the only way we could think to maybe help our baby survive.
Yeah. So we decided that night to do an injection. I did my estrogen suppository, and then they scheduled us for an ultrasound the next morning.
Thank
you.
Yeah,
finally, that's what I wanted Friday. So then Tuesday the 30th, we went in for an ultrasound and another blood draw, and
they did both. They wanted to have both the blood draw to know what the number was at, and the ultrasound just to check and see if like the tech had missed something the first time around, because that's what we were thinking. We were thinking they missed the gestational sac somehow.
Yeah, so they did a transvaginal ultrasound, and they still saw nothing at all. And 2,000 is the HCG mark where they really, really should be able to see something. So she went in, she's like, I don't see anything. I don't know what is happening. So then she did a transabdominal ultrasound, and she's like, oh my gosh, you ovulated.
And we're like, what?
We're like,
that doesn't happen.
I don't ovulate. I literally don't ovulate. That's why we're here. And she's like, well, there's a corpus luteal cyst
We're
right
like,
there
what's a
on
corpus
your ovary.
luteal cyst? Because like we didn't know this
Yeah,
stuff.
literally, I have never, like, I haven't ovulated since I was 16.
That's
I
what
don't
happens
know.
when you ovulate. You get a little thing that then...
the corpus luteal cyst is typically what, you know, provides the estrogen and progesterone that your body needs to sustain the early pregnancy.
So we learned something, and we thought, okay, this is really weird. Like, what's going on? That doesn't seem right, but if that is happening, good.
Yeah. So they do that. They draw my blood. This one was a terrible blood draw. They could not find my vein to save my life or theirs. But they finally got the blood, and then I left, and I'm waiting in the lobby, crying. Dan is getting the car.
It's like pouring down rain.
Yeah, it's pouring down rain. I get a phone call, and they say, we need more blood.
This is the second worst. Well, I don't even know how to rank them. But this was pretty bad. I'm pulling the car up, and she calls me or something. She's like, I have to go back in. I'm like, what?
So I go back in. I sit down in the lab. Finally, she got just barely enough blood that she thought she could make it work. So then I leave, and again, as we're driving away, I get a call, but this time directly from my reproductive endocrinologist, and she says, have you left yet? And I said yes, and so she was actually going to try and catch us to talk to us a little bit, but since we'd already left, we just had the phone call, so Dan was driving, can hardly focus on what we're doing or what's happening. We just need an
explanation. Like, we don't know why the numbers were rising so slow. We don't know why they jumped up. We don't know what this is about a corpus luteal cyst. We're like, why is all of this going on?
Yeah.
None of this makes sense.
So the tech had told us it was a corpus luteal cyst, that I'd ovulated, but when my doctor took a look, she said, I believe that is an ectopic pregnancy, and I believe that it's implanted in your ovary. Ectopic pregnancies are slightly more likely with people doing frozen embryo transfers or just embryo transfers, but they're still quite rare. And I think Dan looked it up, and like 5% of ectopic pregnancies are in the ovary. So they're already super rare, and then 5% of those are ovarian. They're usually in your tube.
Right. They're usually in the fallopian tube. To get to the ovary, they have to pass through the tube backwards. Very unusual. So it's really rare. And like, that's crazy, but at least it sort of makes sense given all of these weird numbers. Like, finally something seems to make sense.
So she said you can opt to do surgery, but I would recommend doing methotrexate instead. And methotrexate is basically a really low dose of chemo that they give women, and it's supposed to help resolve the ectopic pregnancy, makes the tissues break down and involute and come back out so that you pass them naturally without surgery. She did give me the option of going right into surgery and skipping the methotrexate, because when you get methotrexate, you have to wait a minimum of 3 months before you can try again with another transfer, so that they can be sure that everything's resolved and that you don't have any more methotrexate in your system.
It's really bad for any embryo, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked it over, and we were like, an injection is better than surgery, and you know, we're probably going to take some time off anyway, because we were pretty drained from the whole saga of this happening. So we went with that, and then she was like, okay, well then come back in later today. Yeah,
she said, we'll call you, tell you where to go pick up the prescription, and then you'll bring it in and we'll administer it here in the clinic.
And we're like, okay, they're really on the ball now. They don't want us they don't want her to die from a burst ectopic pregnancy. So so they really wanted us to come in that day.
Yeah, so I just went home. I took the rest of the day off work. That was a hard wait, and we just kept on waiting, and they never called us. And then the clinic closed, and once again, I got onto the portal, and they had the results of that HCG draw on the portal without ever calling. So those ones was 2,507.
So it's still going up. It's not quite 500, but it went up a decent amount.
Yeah.
And we were like, we don't really, like, we wish we could have gotten the injection today, because this is now a matter of like kind of life and death here. So we waited, and did you ever get a hold of them that evening?
Well, my doctor did call us a little while later, and she said, you know, I'm really sorry. I meant to have you guys come in, but I was waiting on some results from the second blood draw. So when they made us come back in, she was checking my liver counts because methotrexate can be really hard on your liver, and I'm already on some pills for my ulcerative colitis that can be hard on your liver.
So she was on top of things. She was trying to make sure that the methotrexate wasn't going to make your liver shut down, which was really good. We were glad she was on top of that.
But even though she'd put that in for a rush order, they did not run that test in time. So that was what she was waiting on and why we couldn't go back in. But the next morning, she calls me first thing. It's like 7 or 7:30, and lets us know that everything's in, that it all looks great, and that I would be getting my methotrexate that morning. And then she said that a nurse would be calling me within an hour to let me know what pharmacy to go to pick up the methotrexate dose.
So she didn't go into work, and then we're waiting again.
Yeah, and we just keep waiting, and that's just kind of the theme of this process. And finally, around lunchtime, I was like livid. I was so mad, and I just was like, this is ridiculous. I took a day off of work. I'm taking sick time for this, and they're not calling me. So I start calling and emailing, and they finally call me back after 2 tearful voice messages and 2 messages to the nurses portal. And they were like, we're really sorry. The pharmacy wasn't even open at that time. They don't open till 10, so that was why we didn't call right away. But they said, it's ready now, go in and pick it up.
So we drove all the way out there. It was actually kind of far out because it was a special pharmacy that compounded it for her like height and weight and stuff. So we go all the way out there, get the medication. That was really easy. We go back to the clinic, and then something really weird happened when we drove up to the clinic. It was like
we walk in
and it felt strange. It's because it was kind of like dark, and there were people wandering around and sitting in chairs. We're like, what's happening? This is like a lobby. There's no one ever in here. And the power had gone out on this entire building, 4 stories, and no one could get up the elevators because the power was out. And there were people stuck in the elevators.
Yep, so for like a couple hours.
Really glad we weren't in the elevator. That would have made it even worse. But so we were just like, well, I guess the power's going to come back on at some point.
Yeah, we just went a couple blocks away to a coffee shop.
And I just checked the power outage map until finally that went away, and then we also called in and they were up and running, so we went back over.
Yeah, so we go in, and finally they're able to give me the methotrexate, and it's actually 2 injections. I thought it was just going to be 1, but it was a big enough dose that they had to give me 1 injection on each hip. So
not fun, and it's really fun. Like it's chemo stuff, so they were all geared up with gloves and gowns and everything, and I was like, am I supposed to be in here for this? And they said, no, you're fine. They were really casual about it, but I was just, it's awful to see somebody go through that, and then like the rest of the day too, she was feeling sick and miserable.
Yeah, because it is a pretty serious drug, and it did make me feel pretty gross. I also had to get more blood drawn while I was there. It took another 3 tries, and it was up another 500 to 3,028.
But they did say that can happen. It can go up a little bit more before it kicks in, so they just had us wait and do another one a few days later.
Yeah, so a few days later I go in, and on May 4th, and it was 4,083. So it had continued to rise, but they still weren't super concerned at that point. It's still only been a couple days, and they figured that it had probably gotten even higher than that and was starting to fall. So at that point, they said, we need to check it again in a couple days, and it needs to have fallen at least 20%, or you're going to have to come in for another dose. So I went in for the next blood draw, and this time it was down to 3,153 from 4,083, so it had dropped plenty.
And once it starts dropping, it's going to keep dropping. We felt a lot of relief at that point that it hadn't kept climbing.
That was the first time the number had ever gone down.
And we knew about it. The first time we knew about it was around 2,500, and we got in the methotrexate. So we were trying to stop the ectopic pregnancy from bursting at that point, and it got all the way up to 4,000, which was terrifying, honestly. She kept thinking, like, is this normal?
I was definitely having pains.
Yeah, so we're really glad that it started dropping, and then we just kept watching it drop as we kept going into more blood tests.
Yeah, the next one was down to 1,147, and they waited a whole week for that one. And then they waited 1 more week, and on the 21st of May, it was down to only 223. So we were really relieved. We thought we were out of the woods and that we could finally just move on and heal from it, because, essentially we lost the same pregnancy twice. We thought it was, a really early miscarriage, and we were mourning that. And then, we thought that there was hope. We thought that there had been this miraculous turnaround and that things were going well. And then
that one was ectopic.
And then that one was ectopic, and we had to do the methotrexate for that one. And so, this was the span of 2 months. The transfer was on March 28th, and that blood draw where it was to 223 was May 21st. So it was just a really long, exhausting process, and we were really thankful to at least be done and be able to have some closure.
Except
that was not the end.
In reality, and we're going to have to shoot another video for this.
Yeah, it's just getting too long.
There's a whole bunch more that happened, and she ended up in the hospital just 2 days later.
Yeah, we do just really want to take a second to recommend that everybody who is struggling with infertility find themselves some support groups. I have found amazing support through the Facebook communities that I've joined, and
that's the only way we made it through that whole process.
Yes.
Because they know things in those groups.
Yeah.
They've been through it, and we can post any kind of question, and they're going to
Yeah.
have an answer. And it might not always be like we know what's wrong, but you get a range of responses.
Yeah, they at least give you an idea so that you kind of are prepared, and it just helps you wait that time from when you ask your doctor until you hear back. They can give you some insight, and they just give you a lot of encouragement. If you have any questions or comments for us, go ahead and leave them in the comment section below.
If you want to know anything about the blood testing process or the numbers that you're kind of looking for, just let us know.
Yeah.
Or if you have a similar experience you want to share, go ahead.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your stories as well. Thank you so much for watching and following our story. Stay tuned for part 2 next week.
We post every Monday, so just check back, and also hit the little subscribe and the bell just to be notified of new videos.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see ya. Good.
So.